Hi, this is Rebecca Lane, and I'm here to give you the step 3, the third step in developing your slides for public speaking in the classroom. All right, so we're on step 3. So step number 1, we were looking at creating blank slides, avoiding the template. Step number 2, we were developing that first step in creating glance media, which is what our slides are going to be. And that first step is finding images that we can fill our slides with that help us tell the story. All right, so step 2 was finding images to fill those slides with and making sure that they were legal images for us to use. Step 3 is about choosing, inserting, and formatting your text. So the first thing we want to think about with text is we want to think about what words do we want to use. When we are choosing text, we want to make sure we are keeping it simple. And the very first step for keeping it simple is limiting the bullet points and the text, limiting bullet points altogether and limiting the amount of text that we use. For this class, you will not use more than 5 words on any given slide. For any slide that you have in this class, you must include at least 1 word on that slide, and you must include no more than 5 words on that slide. And we're doing this for a reason. So first, we're all familiar with death by bullets. So bulleted slideshows have been ridiculed by everyone that watches them, yet they continue to populate the majority of presentations. How many lectures have you sat through where you read the slides while the speaker read them to you? So it got to be a reading session as opposed to a learning session. We don't want to do that. Research has shown that we really can't read and listen at the same time. So you're going to choose one thing to focus on, and usually what people do is they actually read the slides and they ignore the speaker. This doesn't really do anybody any good. We're not making a document, we're making a presentation. The slides are basically the backdrop. They are supplemental to the words that you are saying. Just like we incorporate concepts like repetition and strong delivery to help keep people's attention and to help them remember what we're saying by repeating those themes. We use those because that is good speaking, that is good storytelling. We don't want our slideshow to take over our content. So rule number 1, no bullets. You may not use bullets in your slides in this class. You will lose a lot of points for that. And rule number 2, do not include more than 5 words on any slide. Also, make sure that you include at least 1 word on every slide. Now, as we are talking about inserting and formatting your text, the very first thing I want you to do is go back to your outline. Go back to your outline and figure out what words you want to include. So we've been talking about hugs in these other examples. So I found this article, and this is on the National Institute of Health website. And they've got this article about hugs. This article is by, who is this by? Let's find out. Well, it's published on the National Institute of Health website. And one of the things that they say that Kathleen C. Light at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill said is she's done a whole bunch of research and she's found that people who spend at least 10 minutes holding hands have higher levels of oxytocin in their body than people who have not spent 10 minutes holding hands. So let's go back to that slideshow that we were working on earlier. So earlier I chose some birds, but I decided to change this up a bit. So I could write holding hands, and that would be kind of repetitive, right? So maybe I want to write down what this means, right? So 10 minutes, maybe I write down more oxytocin, or maybe I write down happier. And this is something, I can brainstorm this right now, and I can make some choices a little bit later. But see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you're not going to have any more words than this. Okay, so let's look at the next slide. What else can we say about hugs? People who get lots of hugs and other warm contact of home have the highest levels of oxytocin. So maybe 10 minutes here, and maybe we say all the time. Maybe we don't even need all the time. So maybe we do this, and then maybe we do this. So you see, this takes a little bit of brainstorming, figuring out what words are going to really add to what you're saying. Okay, so we're going to say that for the purposes of right now, I have chosen 2 slides for my slideshow. I've got happier, happiest. What else do we need to do? Well, let's look at what the slides say. Ideally, we want to create a pattern. And the tools that we have to create pattern are size, font, color, and placement. So let's walk through these. First, we're going to talk about size. We want to create a pattern with text size. So what I recommend is do not include any text that is smaller than size 42 font. So let's go back to this slideshow. How big was this automatic? It's 42. So this right here is the smallest that I want to use. But one of the things I want to call your attention to is, do you see how inconsequential this seems compared to the subject of this picture? I mean, this doesn't look like it matters at all, and this looks like it matters a lot. So let's think about making the text compete really well with the subject of my picture, right? So what happens if I do this? And so this one, I made it the biggest on the last one. So we're going to create a pattern. So if we have a text size that we can use regularly, that's one of the things we want to do, right? Is we want to use large text consistently. So here we go. So we've got happier, happiest. Cool. All right. So font size. We want it to compete with the subject of the image. So the subject of the image is the point of the image, right? So if I'm just looking at this image right here, the subject of this image is these hands. The girl in the background, she's out of focus. She's not the subject of the image. The subject is the clasping of the hands. Same thing with this. When we look at this, the subject of the image is these guys. This is all the background. Okay. So let's put those away for a second. We've talked about size. Now I want to talk about font. For the purposes of the slides in this class, and for the purposes of slides in general, we want to create a pattern. In order to create a pattern, what you need to do is you need to have consistency. Now, if we're going for super duper advanced design, you see people use a whole bunch of different fonts. For the purposes of this class, we are going through basic design training. Now, for that basic design training, I will suggest that you use one single font. I do not want to see you use more than one font on your slideshow. So you want to make sure you're choosing your fonts well. You want to choose fonts that are easy to read. You don't want to have really wacky stuff, because if I can't read it, it doesn't really help me. And one of the things that you can think about is you want to make sure that you've got fonts that are sans serif. So serif fonts are fonts that are traditionally used in documents. So you see at the bottom of the M down here, it says omnium and all of these words. You see the little feet on the bottom of these letters. Now, when you have a huge block of text, not a huge block of text, but when you have text on a page and the text is dominating the page, Serif, those little feet on the bottom of those letters, that helps you read the text. It helps create lines so that your eyes don't lose their place. Now, sans serif fonts, they're cleaner. They're easier to read when they're projected on a screen. And here's the deal, is if you're only using 5 words, you're not going to have a whole lot of lines. So you want to go ahead and clean up the text, clean up the visual noise, and make it a lot more simple. And you will do that by choosing sans serif font. So let's see. Let's double check what I've got right here. Right now, this is a sans serif font. Now, I could choose to change up the font, and I could choose any of these fonts right here. And sometimes what's really cool about font is you can choose a font that really speaks to what you are saying. But if you change the font in one place, because font has an emotional context, right? It feels different to look at different fonts. So we don't want to use that because that has a little serifs, right? So we'll go through, we'll find some other fonts. Oh, Gulam, let's see what that is. Oh, it's really pretty. I like that one. All right, so what I'm going to have to do, though, is I have to go back and find Gulam again and make sure that it shows up on the other one. Now what happened is this kind of messed up here. So I am going to have to go back and make this a little bit smaller, and we can do that pretty easily by just typing things in, right? But if I change that here, we want to try to make sure we change it here too. So I took that down to 250, and so we've maintained that pattern. Happier, happiest. Great. Okay, so we also want to think about color. So when you're choosing color, you want to make sure you're making it feel like a set. So when we look at these, do you see how these feel like a set? And the reason it feels like a set is because we are seeing the same colors on every single slide. We've got white and turquoise and blue, and they're represented at every slide in this set, white and turquoise, white and turquoise. And the white is kind of the basic color, and then the turquoise really works as the accent color. It emphasizes the words that are most important. You want to make sure that if you use an accent color, you emphasize the words that are most important. Now, the accent color can come in with shapes too, so if you only have one word of text on a slide, you can still bring that accent color in a little bit later, and we'll get to that. Finally, I want to talk about placement. So placement is your last opportunity to really make sure you are creating a pattern. We want to use our text, we want to put our text in the negative space of an image. So the negative space is the space that is not the subject. So the thing that is in the most focus is going to be the subject, and the space around it is not the subject. You want to give your subject some breathing room because you chose that picture hopefully for a reason. You also want to try to choose images. You may have to go back to the drawing board on this. You want to choose images that have a lot of negative space so that you get some options. So when you look at this, you'll see the negative space is the space that is not in focus. The subject, the camera and the microphone, those are the subject of the picture. So any of the space around it that is out of focus, that is the negative space. You want to put your text in the negative space. So here's an example of an image that doesn't have enough negative space. This one wouldn't work if you're just using negative space. Okay? So here's an example of a slide. You could put your text here, but we've got a problem, right? What's the subject of the picture? It's the radio. If we move the text down to the bottom, all of a sudden, it all feels like the same thing. And they're doing something really cool here, is you'll notice that sound effects, though that text overlaps with the subject. When you overlap things just a little bit, it makes them feel like part of the same thing. If we move that text down just a little bit so that it didn't overlap with the subject, it wouldn't look quite as good. Okay, so you probably noticed a problem, right? The negative space in every picture is not going to be in the same place. So how the heck am I going to create a pattern using size and font and color, and especially placement, if I have to put my text in the negative space? Well, I've got a couple of options. First, we can think about image framing. So let's look at this image, for example. This image, I can adjust it. I'm not going to make it a whole lot bigger, but I can move it so that I can line up that negative space. So what happens with this image? So you're going to want to play with your slideshow as a whole, right? And figure out where your negative space can live. I'm going to put that up. I can put it down. And notice that we can see what's going on over here too. So we want to play, and you can use your arrow keys to move things down like just a touch and stuff like that. Okay, so you'll want to make sure that you're creating that consistent pattern, and creating that consistent pattern really deals with playing with things. All right, so the next thing that you can do is, if you can't move these images around to give you sufficient negative space, you can use shapes. So shapes you will want to anchor, and when I say anchor, you'll want it to run off of at least one side. You can also anchor more than one side. If you double click, you can send backward, and that sets that off a little bit. Now if I use that here, I'm going to want to use it here. And I can send that backward, and that sets that off a little bit. All right? If I use a shape on one side, I want to use it on another side. Now we can adjust these shapes too. If you go to Inspector, I can adjust whether I've got color fill or image fill. I can change what color it is. I can change its opacity, which makes it more see-through or less see-through. Now if I do this on one, I'm going to want to do it on the other one, right? So I've got a lot of copy and paste to do every time I change something. So this is one of those ways that we can create a color palette without actually having two colors of text. So right now my color palette is green and white, and I'm going to have green and white on every single slide that I show you. All right, so let's double check one more time and see what else we're doing with the text. What have we got here? So we've created negative space. We've created a pattern. We're only using one font. We've talked about shapes. Here's a really awesome way to use shape. You don't only have to use the blocks. You can also use any other shape that you can do it. Opacity makes a huge difference. Makes it blend in a little bit more. All right, next video is going to be all about step 4. Let me know if you have questions.